In a small village in Tamil Nadu, 3 people walked into a house in 2008 and were never seen again. No missing persons reports were ever filed, no investigation was ever launched. For 4 years, the world moved on, and a family ate dinner every night, literally above the truth of those 3 missing people. What finally brought it to the surface wasn't a detective or a tip or a breakthrough in forensics. It was a reality TV show. A reality show where one afternoon the cameras rolled, the conversation began, and then under the searing studio lights in front of a live audience on a show whose title promises that whatever is said will be the truth, a 17-year-old girl named Bhargavi began to speak. What she said went on to crack open a triple murder that had been lying buried for 4 years, literally buried in the soil outside her own home. This is the story of those 3 missing people, that one reality TV show, and that one 17-year-old girl with the courage to crack it open. This is the story of the Villupuram Triple Murder. Hi everyone, welcome to the Desi Crime Podcast, a show where we dive deep into some of the craziest cases from around South Asia. I'm your host Ishwarya.
And I'm Aryan.
And the case that I have for you today literally feels like it's outside of a Bollywood movie.
It is one of those cases that Ishwarya and I have fought over as to who will get to research and write this case. And I squabbled for a while saying that, it's a story I really like. And I didn't know the story. I just knew the central elements of it, the fact that there was a TV show involved. But of course, Aishwarya gets her way and she gets what she wants. I'm just a man in a woman's world.
He's making me sound like some really domineering character in our story, but I'm not. A lot of times I don't get my way. This time I did. We've actually had this case sitting on the roster of things to cover, research, record and upload for you guys for many months now. I think it's been closer to a year because every asset in this case is in Tamil. It was so hard for us to parse through, find enough transcripts basically of the actual episode of the reality TV show that it was kind of just a long process to try and cover it for all of you, but here we are.
Now, TV shows like the one that they went on have a loyal following and people follow those TV channels. But our loyal followers, somehow it just so happens that 70% of the viewers aren't subscribed.
That's horrible.
So
that's so heartbreaking to me.
What are you doing? I ask you, what are you doing? Hit the subscribe button right now. And if you have more love or if you're more scared of me, either works, either gets me off. Go on Patreon and become a patron, or on YouTube and become a YouTube member. Now that's all I don't know what's called smoking looks I can give. On with the case for today.
Picture a television studio on a humid May afternoon in Chennai in 2012. The lights are bright, hot, the kind that flatten shadows and make everyone look a little too exposed. In Studio 4 of Zee Tamil's T Nagar facility, the set of a popular reality talk show is arranged as it always is. A semicircle of chairs facing a moderator's desk, a live studio audience seated just beyond the camera rigs, and a banner behind the set bearing the show's name in bold Tamil script. Solvathellam Unmai. Translated directly into English, that title means whatever said is the truth. The irony of that name on this particular afternoon will become one of the most remarkable coincidences in Indian television history. Seated in front is the anchor, Nirmala Periyaswamy, who by May 2012 was one of the most recognizable faces on Tamil television. She was the anchor and de facto judge of the show where people brought their most intractable problems and had them mediated on camera. It was one of those programs that function as something between a courtroom drama and a family therapy session. People bring their unsolvable domestic disputes, runaway children, feuding spouses, broken engagements, and Nirmala, described by viewers as commanding and sharp-tongued, mediates. She was known for being direct, sometimes blunt, and for having the particular skill of knowing when to push and when to let the room breathe.
It's like a mix between Dr. Phil and Judge Judy.
Literally,
right?
yeah.
For
The show is more like a Dr. Phil setup, and
For-
her presence is more like a Judge Judy, is how I would describe it.
Yeah, one of my favorite comedians, Adam Ray, does an impression of Dr. Phil. I wasn't aware of Dr. Phil, but through the impressions, I learned of exactly the kind of disputes he mediated. And it was all of like the domestic issues that you just talked about. And somehow people watch that stuff.
People do.
So, yeah.
Now, Nirmala had been doing this since the show's launch in August 2011 and had developed a feel for the rhythms of human distress on camera. On this day, seated in front of Nirmala are 6 people. 3 belong to one family, 3 to another. One of those 6 people, a 17-year-old girl named Bhargavi, is at the center of this story. She is small and thin with dark circles under her eyes that speak of very little sleep and a great deal of fear. 2 days ago, she and her 22-year-old boyfriend, a young man named Satish Kumar, walked into the studio unannounced, disheveled and frightened, begging Nirmala to help them. The young couple were from different castes but deeply wanted to get married. The girl's parents were simply not agreeing. Nirmala says her first instinct was to turn them away. Bhargavi was not yet 18, which meant a marriage was legally out of the question, and she urged them to just go back home. But Bhargavi was immovable. She refused to leave. She said her family would never accept the relationship. She dropped hints, oblique at first, of other problems at home too. And so Nirmala agreed to put them on air. They had travelled 150 kilometers from Villupuram district, a town in southern Tamil Nadu, with nothing but a bag and the desperation of 2 people who believed they had nowhere else to go. And so Zee Tamil's production team contacted both families. The following day, Murugan and Rajeshwari, Bhargavi's parents, arrived at the studio from Villupuram. Satish's parents, his father C. Kumar, a plumber by profession, and his mother K. Saroja came as well. The studio was set. The cameras went live. On this afternoon, the plan was straightforward enough. Nirmala will mediate this domestic issue. The episode will air, people will watch it, and by Tuesday, the channel will be on to the next family with the next crisis. Except nothing about the next 2 hours was going to be simple. What the audience saw first was a recognizable story. A young couple in love, a father who disapproved, the language of caste and community honor that Desi families use when they mean to say no. Murugan was vocal in his objections. He was opposed to Satish. He did not want this marriage. But he also gave no specific reason that made sense. Then Nirmala pushed on the subject of the abuse. You see, Bhargavi had mentioned abuse in her home in their preliminary conversations before filming. And now, on camera, the anchor coaxed her into talking about it. That is when Bhargavi said what she had never publicly said before, that her father had been sexually abusing her since she was a kid.
Aishwarya, so is this for a live audience that is in the studio or also for a live television audience?
It's not televised live. It's yet to be edited and then go on air, by which point obviously it won't be live. But for the people sitting there, yeah, it is live. There is an audience there.
Dude, if I was in that audience and I can totally see myself, wanting to see what a show like this is, I would think that this is a spoof or stage just to add mirchi or masala. It's so unbelievable to be making this, to be making this live.
Literally, if what happens after
yeah.
this would not have happened, I think a lot of people would have thought this is staged. Yeah, I agree. But I think to us, it's so inconceivable to think of sexual assault by a parent. But the more I've covered crime over these last 6 years and the older I've gotten and more people I've come to interact with, I've realized it's really not very uncommon. And to us as Indians, it may feel like, oh, it's more common out in the West because there's so many step-parent, step-child relationships where it's easier for the perpetrator to broach that boundary. But unfortunately, it's not uncommon in India as well. And that's just so heartbreaking to me. It is the singular relationship of a parent and a child that is so sacrosanct in terms of its protection that it needs to offer to the child. This is absolutely heartbreaking to me.
Honor killings and assaulting your own children in that manner is such a flip of what is naturally supposed to be a loving relationship that it seems implausible, but unfortunately is so rampant.
Now, the moment Bhargavi said this, the moment she made this proclamation on air, the studio went quiet. This was no longer a routine episode. Nirmala, following the instincts of her format, then tried to pivot towards reconciliation. The language of Indian talk television in these moments is particular. It appeals to family, to forgiveness, to the idea that relationships can survive almost anything if both sides choose to preserve them. Nirmala, in her own account, said, quote, "After her disclosure of this torture, I tried to convince her of the need to retain family ties," end quote. And then Bhargavi said something that stopped the entire room. Nirmala has described this moment in detail in subsequent interviews. She was mid-sentence, still in the mode of persuasion, when Bhargavi cut through it. She said she was afraid of being killed. Nirmala asked what she meant when Bhargavi said, "He will kill me. I'm sure, because he has done it before." The entire television crew was stunned. Nirmala could not for a full minute make out what was happening. She asked Bhargavi to repeat herself, and Bhargavi did without hesitation, looking directly at the camera. "I know that he is a killer. He has killed 3 people, she said. Nirmala asked who those 3 people were, and Bhargavi told her on camera, in front of Murugan, her father who she was accusing, in front of Rajeshwari, in front of the studio audience. Here is her account, translated from the Tamil of her on-air testimony, essentially as she gave it. Quote, "Shekhar, a friend of my father, brought his daughter Lavanya and her lover Silambarasan and asked my father to advise the lovers not to get married without the consent of Silambarasan's parents. During the course of the discussion, my father gave them something to drink, and the 3 died instantly. He dragged their bodies to a spot inside the compound and buried them. Though I was not at home at the time of the incident, my mother told me what happened." End quote.
What the hell?
And a little bit confusing testimony to kind of throw on air. I don't think the audience could quite parse through what she just said in that moment. I don't think to Nirmala, like the dots of what just happened connected either story-wise.
Aishwarya, help me understand. If you actually did commit those murders, and if you were actually assaulting your child, why would you come on the television show?
That's a fantastic question.
I mean, yeah.
Something...
Either there is this deep knowledge and trust that you have your daughter under such a stranglehold that she's not going to say anything, or you are fame hungry to such a degree that overcomes any fear of... I mean... To be sitting there hearing, do we know what his expressions were as she was narrating this? Did he try to intervene?
He does in his own like small manner, and we'll get to that, but not an outright interjection, not a stop talking, let's leave the studio interjection at all. And another reason could be that he doesn't know that his daughter knows. This isn't a detail that's explicitly clarified anywhere, but it's a deduction that I've made, is that she mentioned she wasn't at home. She found this out from her mother. I'm assuming the father thought there's no way his wife would ever rat him out to anyone. She has kept the secret for however many years now. So maybe he didn't know that she knew at all. Another reason could be that he knew that his daughter and her boyfriend are going on air now, whether or not he shows up. And if there is any avenue for damage control that he needs to do, whether on the abuse allegations or these ones, it's better for him to be on screen because she's going regardless. I don't know. I think there can be a few reasons. It is a little bit absurd that he would do this. I think most likely is that he thought she didn't know.
If I was a murderer, strong if,
yeah.
I ain't going near any journalistic institution,
any investigative body.
Ever.
Aran's not even getting
Ever.
pulled over by the cops for like speeding.
Dude, I'm driving 30
you're gonna get
kilometers an
pulled over
hour
for that too if you drive too slow.
120
Yeah, you will get pulled over.
highway. Fine. Well, I'm not a good murderer.
Now, there are very few moments in the long and frequently voyeuristic history of Indian reality television that match what happened next. Murugan, sitting a few feet from his daughter, said loudly and with apparent conviction that she was lying, that she was troubled, she was rebellious, she was making stories up just to justify her relationship with Satish. Rajeshwari backed him up, claiming she had no idea what she was talking about. And then, in what is perhaps the most chilling piece of behavior in the entire episode, Murugan performed a complete reversal. He stood up, he walked across the set to where Satish was seated, he extended his and then he made a quick exit. Bhargavi's mother Rajeshwari, through all of this, looked like she was about to collapse. She was visibly shaking. After the camera stopped rolling, Murugan and Rajeshwari found Nirmala backstage. What happened next is something Nirmala has said she cannot forget. Rajeshwari literally fell at her feet, weeping, begging her not to air the episode. Murugan tried to do the same and Nirmala stopped him from kneeling. She said, quote, "I still can't forget the plea in her eyes when she fell at my feet." Murugan also tried to do the same, but I did not allow him to, end quote. Nirmala refused to suppress the segment. She told them it would air. And so Murugan and Rajeshwari got on a bus back to Villupuram that same evening. Murugan, furious with his wife for what he apparently considered a failure to manage the situation in the studio, abused her verbally throughout the bus ride. At a town called Tindivanam, he got off the bus. He told Rajeshwari she would never see him alive again. And then he just disappeared into the crowd. Now, before we can understand what Bhargavi said that afternoon and why it mattered, we need to understand the world she came from. Villupuram is a district in the Kudalur region of Tamil Nadu, about 150 kilometers from Chennai on the road south. It's not a place that usually makes national headlines. It's the kind of place where people know each other's family names across generations, where a man's reputation travels faster than he does, where the boundaries between castes are maintained not through law, but through something far more durable. Expectation. The expectation of who you're allowed to love. The expectation of who you're allowed to become. Tamil Nadu has long presented something of a paradox to those who studied caste violence in India. It is the state where Periyar's self-respect movement was born in the 1920s, a movement explicitly devoted to dismantling the caste system and asserting Dalit dignity. It's a state where major political parties have for decades made anti-caste rhetoric a cornerstone of their platforms. And it is simultaneously a state where, according to the NGO Evidence, which works on Dalit rights, nearly 400 honor killings were recorded in just 5 years between 2018 and 2023. According to researchers at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, approximately 150 such cases occur every year in the state. Activists who work in the field argue the real number is far higher because police routinely record honor killings as ordinary murders and the underlying motive is deliberately hidden. The case we're talking about today, while not a textbook honor killing, is soaked in the same cultural logic. The logic that some lives are expendable when desire transgresses caste boundaries. And the village at the center of our story is called M. Kuchipalayam, a small settlement about 5 kilometers from Villupuram town. It is here that E. Murugan lived. He was a furniture manufacturer. Specifically, he ran a sofa making and upholstery workshop from the village. By the mid-2000s, he had a modest home, a wife named Rajeshwari, a daughter named Bhargavi, and the kind of social standing that came with running your own business in a small town. He was known, visible, seemingly respectable. And across the web of Murugan's professional dealings lived another family, that of A. Shekhar. Shekhar was a well digger, a man who earned his living through hard physical labor, boring holes into the earth in a part of the world where the monsoon can be unreliable and water scarce, and the men who find it have value. He had a wife named Jiva and a daughter named Lavanya, who was in her early 20s. Shekhar and Murugan were not just acquaintances, they were childhood friends, men who had known each other long enough to call each other in times of trouble. Shekhar's village, Nalar Pillai, was about 30 kilometers from Murugan's home. But in the world of small town Tamil Nadu, that's not a meaningful distance between two men who grew up together. It was through this friendship that Murugan came to know Lavanya, Shekhar's daughter. And it was through knowing Lavanya that everything began to unravel. Now, Lavanya was in her early 20s, described by police as approximately 20 to 22 years old when this story reaches its crisis point. She was a young woman who had fallen in love with someone her community would have preferred she hadn't. His name was Silambarasan, a 27-year-old employee as a worker in Murugan's own furniture workshop, present in Murugan's daily life, dependent to some degree on Murugan for his own livelihood. Now, why would any of this be an issue? It's an issue because Murugan had fallen for Lavanya too. Yes, married Murugan with a daughter about Lavanya's age had fallen for Lavanya. But Lavanya was in love with Silambarasan, and there was no changing that. The two had been in love for some time now, and so when their families, particularly Silambarasan's, showed opposition to the match, the couple did what young people across India do in these situations. They eloped. They got married quietly, without ceremony, without the blessing of either families. And then they needed somewhere to hide while the storm passed. And the person who stepped in to help during this time was Lavanya's father, Shekhar. He was, by every account that exists, the only person in either family who had supported his daughter's relationship at all. He was trying to protect her. And so Lavanya's father went to the one person he trusted most in the world, the person who had known him since childhood and who seemed like a safe and reasonable person to shelter his daughter and her new husband. This, of course, was Murugan. Shekhar turned to his old friend and asked Murugan to give the young couple a place to stay, to keep them safe while the families worked through their feelings. And Murugan said yes. Now, once Silambarasan and Lavanya took up residence in Murugan's house, the situation quickly became something other than an act of hospitality. Murugan, according to police, developed a physical relationship with Lavanya while she was living under his roof. Whether this relationship was ever consensual or not, we don't know. Reports don't say. What we know is the power dynamics at play here. Lavanya was dependent on Murugan not just for her safe shelter, but also for her husband's employment and their only source of income. The possibility that the relationship never began consensually or was ever consensual at all is huge. Slowly, it became clear to the couple that not only did Murugan want Lavanya, he also had his eyes on all the gold jewelry the couple had brought with them after their wedding, ornaments that represented significant financial value for people of modest means in rural Tamil Nadu.
Ash, I mean, this is an insane Romeo Juliet kind of saga, entrenched in caste, entrenched in lust by Murugan. I just want to do some kind of housekeeping and understand a few things. So now Shekhar, who is the father of Lavanya, therefore Lavanya's family, part of the family that is disapproving of this union, is it fair to say he is of the progressive sort and is thus, trying to offer his daughter refuge?
Either progressive or just he loves his daughter and he understands even if he thinks a mistake has been made, he thinks, okay, it's been made. I want to be able to save my daughter. I want things to calm down and for us to welcome them back home. That's kind of where he's coming from. So he's just trying to hide this couple away while the families sort their feelings out and everyone calms down a little.
Given he's I'm guessing the patriarch of his family, where he might have some, a voice and power, what he's trying to do is, I'm guessing, keeping them away from her husband's family, which might be posing a danger. But that kind of flips the usual dynamic in these cases, where it's usually the daughter's family that is more stricken with the need to preserve honor rather than the sons, although we've seen those cases too. Yeah.
But that's usually caste dependent, right?
Yeah.
There is a higher lower caste dynamic in that as well. So it is possible that the guy's family in here was more enraged than the girl's family.
So that's
was.
one element. That, I mean, as weird as it is, there's some sliver of, positivity here in that he was trying to save his daughter no matter what. And now we come to Murugan, who seems to have fallen in love, which is a very strong phrase, or maybe just lust towards this minor.
Probably not.
Same age as his daughter. Murugan has is attracted to Lavanya. Do we know if this attraction predates her moving into his house because of their proximity in the community, or was it something that developed purely after the move-in?
Reports actually don't state that, but it's very possible it existed before Lavanya and Silambarasan ever moved in, just because Shekhar and Murugan have been friends for so long.
Yeah.
So he has had contact with Lavanya before. He's seen her around before. Lavanya's boyfriend works in Murugan's factory, and so it's not that the two haven't had contact before. This is the first time he's seeing this woman and something has come over him. He's seen her for a long time. These are childhood buddies. So I'm guessing, it's just purely based on a hunch. No report states this, but I'm guessing it may have begun before they ever moved in.
That because these are pedophilic tendencies that he's displaying, and if he's capable of displaying it towards his own daughter, who's being abused, has been abused according to her for years now, I wouldn't be surprised if this lecherous man had his eyes on the other girl, Lavanya, as well.
Now, weeks passed. Shekhar, Lavanya's father, the man who had arranged this shelter, waited to hear from his daughter and eventually travelled to Murugan's house to check on the couple when he didn't hear from them for a while. What happened then, when he arrived in Murugan's house, planted the seed of the first murder. Accounts vary on whether it was an argument over the return of the jewelry that Murugan had slowly got in his possession or a confrontation about Murugan's relationship with Lavanya. What is consistent across all sources is the outcome. Murugan gave Shekhar liquor spiked with poison, and Shekhar died inside that house. His body, the body of the childhood friend who had trusted Murugan enough to send his daughter to him, was buried in the compound of Murugan's home in the dead of night. He was buried by Murugan and another employee of the furniture workshop, a man who went by the name Murthy. Then came Lavanya's murder. Now, there are two versions of why Lavanya died, and both are terrible in their own way. The version offered by the Director Inspector General who oversaw the investigation states that Murugan and Lavanya's own husband killed Lavanya together. That her husband had fallen out of love and wanted to move on and chose to participate in her murder rather than face the complications of their marriage. The second version, reported in other outlets and arguably more consistent with the broader sequence of events, holds that Lavanya discovered what had happened to her father and threatened to go to the police, and that Murugan killed her to silence her. Whichever version is closer to what happened that day, the result was the same. Lavanya was strangled. At this point in time, she was just 21 years old, with her body now buried in the compound alongside her father's. And then the last to die was Silambarasan. With two people already in the ground, Murugan's most pressing problem had become Silambarasan himself, a man who had seen or participated in what had happened and who was now a liability Murugan could not afford to leave walking around. Whether Silambarasan tried to blackmail Murugan, threaten exposure, or simply became someone Murugan could not trust to stay quiet, the result was predictable and yet again the same. Silambarasan was also killed, poisoned, and buried alongside the others. For his murder, police found that Murugan's own brother, E. Mathiyarasan, was involved. The circle of the crime had now expanded to include Murugan's family too. 3 bodies, 3 people who had walked into that house carrying nothing but ordinary human hopes of staying safe and starting a new life together. Shekhar, who had come looking for his daughter. Lavanya, who had asked only to love whom she chose. Silambarasan, who had found work and found love in the same place and lost both in the end. And above the earth where they lay, Murugan's house continued to stand. The furniture workshop kept operating. People came and went. Murugan ate dinner every night over the soil that held 3 bodies. His wife Rajeshwari did the same. Their daughter Bhargavi, who was approximately 13 or 14 at the time and was not home when the murders happened, came home to a house that had changed forever, though she did not yet know why. Back in Nalar Pillai, Jeeva waited for her husband to come home. She waited for Shekhar. She waited for Lavanya. She told herself stories that made the absence bearable. That Shekhar had found the couple and was staying with them while things settled down. That Lavanya would call soon. That there was a reasonable explanation for the silence. But 4 years passed. The monsoon came and went 4 times. Lavanya's mother kept telling herself the stories. She never once filed a missing persons report. She later told police she had no reason to believe anything sinister had happened, that she believed that her family had simply needed time and space after what had been an emotionally tense time for all of them. But the truth, when it came out, was worse than any story she had told herself. Which is what brings us back to the girl sitting in that television studio. Because the bravery of what she did on May 17th, 2012 only makes sense when you understand how long she had been carrying what she knew and at what cost she had been carrying it. Bhargavi was born into the home of a murderer, though she did not know it yet when she was a child. She grew up in the same house where 3 bodies were buried in the compound outside. She went to school, she did her homework. She was, by every measure available, an academically serious child. She would eventually score fantastically in her 12th standard board examination, a performance that placed her in the top tier of her class and that speaks of a girl who paid attention, who wanted more than what was immediately in front of her. She had told people she wanted to be an engineer. But Bhargavi's home was not a safe place. From a young age, Murugan had been sexually abusing his daughter. She has spoken about this publicly since the case became news, and it's necessary to name it plainly and not move past it quickly, because it's inseparable from everything else that follows. This abuse was not a single incident. This was prolonged, repeated sexual abuse by her father, beginning when she was a young child. Bhargavi described it herself, quote, "He used to misbehave with me from a very young age. Initially, I was scared and did not disclose it to anyone. Later, I started resisting him and revealed everything to my mother." End quote. Her mother's response was to tell her to be quiet, to not make a scene, to not ruin the family. This is not an unusual response for a woman in Rajeshwari's position. It is, in fact, what countless women in her situation would have been told to say by every social structure around them. But understanding why it happens doesn't make it less devastating to a child. And then came the day that Bhargavi learned about the murders. She was in the ninth standard, roughly 14 or 15 years old. Her father had tried to assault her again. She resisted. Her mother stepped in and broke it up. Later, when Murugan had gone out and the two of them were alone, Rajeshwari did something that she must have believed was protective. She told her daughter the truth about the bodies outside. Murugan had murdered 3 people in 2008, she said. He had buried them in the compound. If Bhargavi kept causing trouble, kept resisting, kept making noise, she might end up the same way. It was a threat dressed as confidence. It was her own mother telling her that her silence was the price of her survival.
Aishwarya, I understand when you say that, the societal structures would have compelled the mother and many mothers in that position to tell their daughter to keep quiet. But then again, I think there is individual responsibility and agency involved, and the mother is an accomplice to me in this case. And
100%.
Just because she's not the one doing the assault, she is facilitating it. She's not protecting her daughter. A child is being abused by both parents, and her final act that may be dressed as a protective act to me is a death threat. And I don't want to belittle the role the mother played, because while there are many mothers that may fall into the oppression of the societal structures, there are also many mothers that stand up for their children against abusive husbands and stop it. And
absolutely.
There
is no excuse.
Absolutely no excuse. And if anything, she is guilty to some degree for what was happening to her daughter. Of course, the dad is a lost case in the sense that he's a lech, a pedophile, a lech, and a criminal. But the mom's role cannot be absolved.
No, the mom's role, to me, she is a criminal in both instances. In all 3 murders, she is an accomplice and she is a party to the abuse on her daughter. There is no 2 ways about that fact. But despite all her attempts at resisting, now Bhargavi was scared when she knew about the murders. Quote, "I got terribly scared and decided to be silent as my mother advised." And so she went silent. She went back to school. She came home. She avoided Murugan when she could, and she endured him when she could not. She sat with the knowledge of what lay outside her window every single day, carrying it the way people carry unbearable things when they have no one to give it to, by packing it down somewhere deep and focusing on the next hour, the next exam, the next morning. That arrangement, the silence, the endurance, it held until Bhargavi fell in love. This man was named Satish Kumar. He was a few years older than her, from a different caste, from the same broader district though. When Murugan discovered his daughter was in a relationship with Satish, the response was not conversation. It was not an attempt at discussion. Murugan beat Bhargavi badly, tried to strangle her, held a knife to her throat, and then told her to end the relationship with Satish. In Bhargavi's words, quote, "He told me to quit my relationship with Satish. He said he would kill me just as he had killed the others," end quote. This was the moment the dam broke. Bhargavi decided she was done being silent. She contacted Satish and they made a plan together. They would leave. Not to the police though. Bhargavi had a specific and not irrational fear of the police, rooted in something she had witnessed personally. She described it later. Quote, "Once a girl who eloped with her boyfriend in our school had to face public humiliation. The police came to the school in search of her and everybody came to know that she had eloped," end quote. In Bhargavi's lived experience, the police were not a resource for young women in trouble. They were another form of exposure, another route to shame and consequences. She would not go to them. Instead, she and Satish boarded a bus to Chennai, travelled 150 kilometers and walked through the glass doors of the Zee Tamil studio in T Nagar. They were looking for Nirmala Periyaswamy. Because on her show, whatever said is the truth. And Bhargavi had a truth she could no longer carry. The segment was filmed on May 17th, 2012 and aired on May 28th, 11 days later. Now here is where the story takes a turn that forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions. Not about the murder, not about the police, but about the media itself.
Ishwara, might I just add that Bhargavi, insofar as figuring out one has many ways of getting out of a situation, you'd like to believe, right? One result has many paths to it. This was literally the most genius and ideal path she could have taken. I don't want to,
It really is, yeah.
underestimate just how courageous an act, just how thoughtful an act to go to a media, a specific channel with a specific show, knowing that it could actually vindicate her, bring her to justice, and protect her all at the same time. And of course, a runaway couple at a police station, Tamil Nadu or not anywhere in India, will be.
And she's a minor.
It wouldn't
She
have
wouldn't.
worked. It simply
There's no
wouldn't
way.
have worked. So I mean, honestly, so many times, we come across cases where we're like, this woman tried everything possible to get out of a abusive relationship. What more could she have done, right? This is more, and
This is
not
more.
everybody has the privilege or luxury, and it's not your responsibility to
course, of
find alternate sources than our judiciary, because that's the promise the sovereign nation makes to you. But in her individual scenario, it is just mind blowing that she found the scenario that ultimately did get her out of it. And it just makes me, think
Yeah.
twice about. We're obviously flooded with DMs and emails, people asking us to cover this case or that case, and sometimes cases that are relevant to them, related to their family people. I think I'll be more diligent in going through those emails. Of course, the team goes through it, and usually it's about awareness regarding a case. But just to think that, I'll keep an eye out for what if somebody reaches out similarly, right? In order to, with a personal story
With a
that
personal
we
story,
can
100%.
help them with. It just made me think about, there'll be a shift in the team's attitude towards the diligence with which we'll scour emails. Because what if one day, it just requires one such case, just one such story to save somebody's life.
Now, coming back to our uncomfortable question about the media. In that 11-day window between when the episode was shot and when the episode aired, Zee Tamil's production team did something that is, depending on how you look at it, either responsible editorial caution or a catastrophic failure of civic duty. They did not immediately take the footage to the police. Instead, they sent a crew to verify Bhargavi's story. Reporters travelled to Nalarpillai, the village where Shekhar had lived, and spoke to residents there. What they found corroborated what Bhargavi had said. 3 people, Shekhar, his daughter Lavanya, and her husband Silambarasan, had indeed disappeared in 2008 and had not been seen or heard from since. Some villagers confirmed the couple had eloped and sought shelter at a friend of Shekhar's. The production team could not verify the murders directly, only Murugan's compound could confirm that, but they were convinced enough that something terrible had happened to proceed with airing the segment. In the interim, Bhargavi, Satish, and his parents were put up in a hotel in Chennai at the channel's expense. And then they waited. They waited 11 days because the channel needed more verification, not because there was a legal process to follow. They waited 11 days because the channel wanted to build anticipation, finalize editing, and air the episode on a date that would maximize viewership. Quote, there was a gap of 11 days between shooting and telecast. They should have passed the information to the police on the same day the girl revealed the crime. The accused got sufficient time to tamper with evidence. Who would be responsible if the accused had escaped or committed suicide? Who is responsible for the safety of that girl? The media is not supposed to handle law and order in this way. End quote. Nirmala's response when pressed on the 11-day delay was candid in a way that perhaps she did not fully intend. The viewership of our show is important to us, is all she said. She also added that she had not wanted to invite what she called unnecessary trouble by informing the police before the telecast.
Aishwarya, I might have a controversial take here. Think of it more as me trying to brainstorm an opinion rather than coming strongly with it. But when the DIG says that it was the media's responsibility is not to take law and order in their hand, I don't fully agree with that. I think there's a reason the fourth pillar of our democracy is journalism, and there is, I can think of, from the Watergate scandal to the NAM files to when the Washington Post did that expose of the Vatican or of the Catholic Church and the minors that were being abused. they had all come across ample evidence right at the get-go that put them in the directions of their investigations that at times spanned way more than 11 days, and the argument can be made, hand over that evidence to the police immediately. I think insofar as they were corroborating the details of what were shared, and they were in there giving the whistleblower, right, almost like a whistleblower, if I would draw that analogy, protection during this. Media journalism allows for that, because I don't think there is something so terribly wrong. I understand what she means by views. You're right. I think it's unintended. It just means that there is the value of our work should be recognized by people, and we are trying our best to safeguard everything else. But this is why we've created the show. And so to me, it's not you the moment somebody says something, you just go and tell the police. That's not how journalism in general works, right? Like, journalists come across stuff that they try to corroborate and trace down, and they don't pass on to the police. That's how exposes are made. That's how sting operations are done. And if we are to say that any time a journalist comes across any piece of evidence, they cannot take it in their own hands, I think we are doing a disservice to journalism. I'm not saying this was entirely moral in how they were going about it,
or entirely journalistic either. I would argue that, at least in public perception, maybe there is more leeway given to, let's say, if this wasn't a gossip, family feuding talk show, but actually an investigative branch of a reputed news channel, I have a feeling people would be more understanding of them taking 11 days to corroborate their story, because the intention at the forefront of that body is to investigate and put this out.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm
views,
not
ultimately,
arguing,
yes, but
I'm not arguing against what people believe. That's a fact, right? I'm saying what they believe is something that I think is unjustified, and insofar as.
But I think there's also a difference between an actual investigative journalistic body and what this was, which is a talk show meant for gossip and used as fodder in that regard.
It ultimately falls within the banner of a news organization that realized there is something investigative and merit here. And when people with creative and journalistic impulses, no matter the show that they're running, come across stuff that maybe is beyond the confines of their own format or show, I think they are allowed to push it as long as they, are truly journalistic in their endeavor, and them trying to corroborate detail, talking to people. Those are very investigative aspects of what they were doing. And we have, again, time and time again seen the TMZ, which is one of the most infamous PAP organization, has journalists within it that have come across details and facts that have led to investigations that are meaningful. And we've also seen, and this is where the difference between screen media and print media comes in. Had this been a single investigative journalist who had timed their piece's release on a Sunday rather than a Thursday to maximize readership, I don't think we would have felt that strong a guttural response, because there is something about, seeing it visually that feels slightly more wrong than a single journalist going undercover. But to me, it's all the same thing. And 11 days is a pretty quick turnaround time, because I have sympathy for somebody creating an investigative show and coming across something so interesting, something that isn't immediately preventing a crime. Like, let's say what they discovered was something that overshadowed a crime about to happen. Of
course, then the responsibility is very different.
Even in this, I think the DIG is right insofar as saying, what if the girl harmed herself, right? But I see them taking responsibility as much as they can do with adults, which is, keep them in a hotel safe, because the alternatives of telling the police again, like what. Again, this is where whistleblowers often go to journalists to say, please don't go to the police. They will not understand. Please don't go to the police. What the whistleblower in this case wanted was the airing of the episode. The victim got what the victim wanted. The victim didn't want the police. The victim didn't want that for clear reasons. It'll be lost in the rigmarole of the Indian judiciary. So often we have seen in print journalism, whistleblowers are protected no matter what, by the journalist, and the US police force cannot tell a journalist, tell me who your whistleblower was, because that will help me with national security or whatnot. So I think I think there's just more nuance in where I know public opinion is one thing, but I my controversial opinion is I think they mostly did the right thing.
I want to know from all of our listeners, what do you guys think about this? This is something I'm going to go back and think about. Sometimes we spark debate here that I'm like, okay, this one's going to consume my brain tonight. I think this is one of those. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Now, this exchange between the DIG and Nirmala, a senior officer saying a girl's life was at risk and 3 murders needed to be investigated immediately, and a television anchor saying her viewership was a competing consideration, sits in the record of this case as one of its most uncomfortable artifacts. It's important to hold 2 things at once here and to resist the urge to flatten this into a simple narrative of media villainy. Like Aryan said, Nirmala's decision to air the episode at all, despite Rajeshwari's desperate pleading at her feet, was an act of genuine courage and moral clarity. Many anchors in many countries would have made a different calculation, and the channel's decision to verify Bhargavi's claims before airing rather than simply broadcasting an unverified accusation was defendable editorial practice. But the 11-day wait was something else. It was a decision that prioritized the spectacle of a revelation over the urgency of justice. It was a decision that gave a murderer more than a week to run. And boy, did he use every hour of it. Now, 3 days after the airing of the episode, on June 1st, 2012, a woman walked into the office of Villupuram SP N. Bhaskaran. She was Jiva, Shekhar's wife, the woman who had waited 4 years for her husband to come home. Jiva had watched the show and the story she had been telling herself for 4 years, that Shekhar had found the couple and was staying with them somewhere, sorting things out, that Lavanya would call when she was ready, crumbled on contact with what Bhargavi had said on that screen. She had filed no missing persons report when Shekhar disappeared. She had filed no report when Lavanya went silent. She had, in a manner countless other people would do, simply waited and hoped and told herself comfortable stories. But then she said, quote, "After watching the show, I feared my husband, daughter and son-in-law were murdered, and then I approached the police." End quote. The Villupuram police moved quickly once Jiva filed her complaint. Bhargavi was brought in by investigators and asked to show them where in the compound she believed the bodies had been buried. And with lightning speed, police teams and forensic units descended on the family's home. They brought digging equipment to a house where on the outside, nothing appeared to have been changed. That day, the neighbors watched. The compound was opened. And then they found them. 3 sets of skeletal remains buried in the compound of Murugan's house, precisely where Bhargavi had indicated. The forensic teams worked methodically, using dental superimposition and DNA analysis to confirm identities. Though it took several days to make the identification official, the physical reality was already irrefutable. 3 people had been murdered in this house and buried here, and for 4 years, the family had been living, eating, sleeping above them. The Additional Director General of Police, S. George, confirmed the discovery to the press. Quote, "It all began when Bhargavi told in front of her parents at the reality show on Zee Tamil channel that her father had murdered 3 persons. Now we are on the lookout for Murugan and his wife Rajeshwari." End quote. Murugan had of course vanished by now. So had Rajeshwari. The police put out a full manhunt. And then an officer came up with the plan that would bring Murugan in. A plan that is in its own way one of the more creative acts of policing in this entire story. He called Murugan's mobile phone, impersonating a representative of Zee Tamil, claiming that the channel wanted to give the family a chance to tell their side of the story. He said they would be protected and treated fairly, that the cameras and crews would come to them wherever they are. But every word of it was a lie. Murugan, perhaps desperate for some avenue of control, perhaps genuinely believing he could still manage the narrative, agreed to meet. The police arrived in a private vehicle with a press sticker on its windshield. Officers carried cameras on their shoulders to complete the illusion. And the moment they got within reach, they arrested Murugan and Rajeshwari on the spot. Murugan's brother, Mathiyarasan, was arrested separately, as was the employee Murthy who had helped bury Shekhar's body. The charges were filed under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code, which is murder, and a case was registered that the Villupuram Mahila Court would now take forward. Murugan's confession to police, summarized by the DIG on this case, filled in the details only he could provide. Quote, "Shekhar's daughter Lavanya and her boyfriend Silambarasan had eloped against the will of their community. They belonged to different castes. Shekhar was the only person in the family who supported their affair. He requested Murugan to give them shelter in his house. Murugan soon developed a physical relationship with Lavanya. He also wanted to rob her jewelry. He killed Shekhar first by strangling him with a rope after making him drunk. After a few days, he and Silambarasan killed Lavanya the same way. Silambarasan helped Murugan because he had fallen out of love and wanted to move on. Murugan did not want to take a chance by leaving any eyewitness alive. So, Silambarasan was killed. All three were buried in the front yard of the house. End quote. Now, what followed the arrest was not the swift and satisfying resolution that true crime narratives are sometimes built on. Real justice in India, as in most countries, moves through the courts at its own pace, and the Villupuram Triple Murder Case was no exception. The distance between the arrests in June 2012 and the final verdict in July 2020 was 8 years. 8 years of hearings, adjournments, evidence reviews, witness testimonies, and the grinding forward motion of a legal system that was not built for speed. The case was tried before the Mahila Court in Villupuram, a court designated for cases involving crimes against women. The accused were Murugan, his brother Mathiyarasan, his wife Rajeshwari, and the employee Murthy. The prosecution was led by Special Public Prosecutor K. Radhika, whose task was to build the case around physical evidence, the skeletal remains, the forensic identifications, as well as witness testimony and Murugan's own confession. The trial had several notable complications. Murthy, who had allegedly assisted in Shekhar's murder, died before the trial concluded. His death meant that the case against him ended without a verdict, and whatever he might have been willing to say under oath died with him. This is not unusual in cases that stretch across nearly a decade. Witnesses age, people ill, move away, change their accounts. Bhargavi herself would have been required to give testimony during the trial, but there is no detailed public record of her courtroom testimony. Rajeshwari's legal position was the most complex. She had been present throughout, present when the bodies were buried, present when the abuse on her daughter was happening, present in the studio when Bhargavi made her revelation, and present at the subsequent attempt to have it suppressed. She had also told her daughter about the murders as a threat, using the knowledge of the buried bodies to keep Bhargavi silent. And yet, the law requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecution was unable to establish that, to the court's satisfaction, that Rajeshwari had directly participated in any of the three killings. And so, she was acquitted. Then, on July 18, 2020, 12 years after the murders, 8 years after the arrests, and 25 years after Bhargavi was born into a home she would one day have to escape, Mahila Court Judge G. Santhi delivered the verdict. E. Murugan was convicted on 3 counts of murder under Section 302 of the Indian Penal Code. The sentence was 3 consecutive life terms. The judge ordered that he serve each term one after the other, not simultaneously, a sentencing structure that signals the court's awareness of what 3 separate lives represented and its refusal to treat them as a single discounted event. He was also fined Rs 75,000. E. Mathiyarasan, Murugan's brother, was convicted for his role in Shekhar's murder, for which he received 1 life sentence and a fine of Rs 25,000. Rajeshwari, like I said, was acquitted. Murthy had died during the trial. And so the court was done. 3 consecutive life terms. In Indian law, a life sentence carries a minimum of 14 years before parole. And so 3 consecutive terms effectively means Murugan faces the remainder of his life in prison with no realistic prospect of release. Whether that is adequate measure for the murder of 3 people, including 1 man who had come to him in trust and 1 woman who had done nothing but love the wrong person in the wrong place, is all for all of you to decide. By any measure, the Villupuram Triple Murder Case is a remarkable piece of criminal history. It involves a set of circumstances so improbable that if it were written out as fiction, an editor would send it back. But beneath the headline, this case is really about several things that deserve more sustained attention than the headline typically allow. The first is about caste and about what it costs to love across its lines. The second thing this case is about is silence. The silence of a mother, of a wife, of a woman who, if had spoken, could have saved 3 lives and 2 homes. The third thing this case is about is the media. Not as a villain, not as a hero, but as something more complicated than either. And the fourth and last thing this case is about is Bhargavi and what becomes of someone who does what she did. After the case broke, Bhargavi was living with Satish and his family. Satish's father, C. Kumar, a plumber, was working on getting her admission to an engineering college. Her mother-in-law, Saroja, was unambiguous about the priority. Quote, she should complete her education. That is more important than marriage. End quote. Bhargavi, who had told anyone who would listen that she wanted to be an engineer, who had scored over 84% on her board exams in the middle of years of abuse and concealed knowledge of murder, had finally found herself a family that valued what she could become. Whether she made it to engineering college, whether she sat at the entrance exams, whether she built the life she had told herself she would, these details are not in public record. But the version of her story that ends with Saroja saying education matters more than marriage is, in its small way, the best outcome that this case had available. If you like what we do here at Desi Studios and absolutely love what we're wearing today, this is merch you can go buy all for yourself.
You can buy this Desi Crime merch in our YouTube store on the link down below at Karak Merch. Keep the engines at Desi Studios rolling so we can pay our videographer right behind the camera to make these amazing episodes just for you.